Hi, Charles of Books Age here, and today I am doing Todds Tag. Now, the Todds Tag was originally created by Todd the Librarian, and I was tagged in it by James. And so I will link Todd's channel and James's channel down below. And I'm going to just dive right in. Now, the first question here is, have you ever regretted joining BookTube? And for me, the answer is no. I've only been on BookTube for about 6 weeks, so I would really hope that I'm not regretting being on BookTube already. So far, I'm really enjoying every last bit of it, though I didn't realize when I started that it would be homework. But so far, I'm really enjoying myself. So no regrets. Number 2, what was the last theater movie you walked out on? And at first, I was like, I don't think I've ever walked out on a movie in a movie theater before. And then I realized there was one time back in 1988, and I think it was around Halloween, and the movie The Night of the Demons had been released, but it wasn't playing anywhere in the city. I'm from New York City, so again, I think I was living in the Bronx at that time. And it wasn't playing anywhere except this one little theater that me and my friends never heard of. It was down in like the southeast corner, southeast even of Alphabet City, which Alphabet City in 1988 was still a pretty hairy place. Today it's like Hipsterville. But back then it was like, yeah, you didn't go there, especially not at night. I think there was a movie that came out right around that time where the guy's, it's a comedy sort of, where he's trying to basically get the hell out of Alphabet City alive. Can't remember the name of the movie. I know the book that the movie Carlito's Way is based on is the same name as that movie, which is why they didn't name the Carlito's Way movie the name of the book. They named it Carlito's Way instead. And I'm just completely drawing a blank on it. But anyway, total tangent. So we decided, we got on the train, went all the way down to Houston Street, walked eastward all the way across, past Alphabet City, to this little movie theater. I think there was some projects there. And we get up to the ticket booth, the ticket window out in the street, and ask for 2 tickets. And the kid in the ticket booth looks at us like, what the hell are you guys doing here, kind of thing. So we thought it was a bit strange. So he goes, I'll be back in a minute. And he leaves. So then we realized later he went and asked permission to be able to sell us tickets to get in the theater, because obviously we didn't live in the area. And so we went in. Now let me set the scene for you, this movie theater. It was a double feature. And the first film was a really bad movie. Beau Bridges movie, and it was called, I have it up here, 7 Hours to Judgment, where he's a judge, and this gang member, drug dealer guy is in his court who's killed this woman in cold blood, and Beau Bridges lets him go because the gang's going to kill his whole family. And then the distraught ex-husband, whose wife is dead, kidnaps the judge, and all this craziness apparently ensues. We didn't make it more than 15, 20 minutes into this movie, so we never even got to see Night of the Demons. So again, let me set the scene. We go in. I don't even remember there being a concession stand. And we go into the main theater, and 90% of the seats were shredded. Like, it looked like someone had taken a big Bowie knife and just shredded the seats. And the other 5% of the seats were either missing or ripped out of their bolts, lying on the floor. And there were a decent amount of people in there, but they were all just talking and hanging out. And there was a bunch of kids running around like it was a playground out in the park while the movie comes on and starts going. And nobody was paying attention to the movie, so we were like, why are they people even in here? And one thing, from being from New York, you trust your instincts. And every once in a while, you end up somewhere and your warning bells go off and you realize something's gonna go down. You need to get the fuck out of here. Excuse my language. And whenever that warning bell strikes, you always listen to it. So 15, 20 minutes in, we're like, no, time to go. Something's not right here. So we left. So I never got to see the movie. And that's the only time I ever walked out on a movie. And it wasn't because the movie sucked. It was just because the theater itself was just so weird and surreal. And again, when you're a New Yorker, you get that instinct that tells you you shouldn't be here, you listen to it. So anyway, that's The only time I walked out in a movie. All right, question number 3. What character do you remember the most? And you can't name a Harry Potter or Twilight character. For me, I'm going to go with Simon Tregarth from Andre Norton's Witch World series. Andre Norton's one of my favorite authors. I probably own more Andre Norton books than I do of any other author. And I have, this is the first book, Witch World. And on the shelf behind me here, all these paperbacks just to the left of the 2 V.E. Schwab books there. Those are 17, counting this one, Witch World books. The last book being actually two books in one volume. So I've got the first 18 books of the series, and I think there's like another 15 more that I haven't got my hands on or read yet. And Simon appears, I think, in the first 5. And he is from our world, and he's an ex-colonel who's being hunted, and they're getting really close to capturing him. And he's so desperate, he takes the only chance he has left to escape, and that's sorcery. And he says here in the back, Simon's forced to give himself up to the mysterious Siege Perilous, an ancient stone of power. It would judge him, determine his worth, and then deliver him into a world in which his mind and spirit should be at home. And Simon is transported into this place called Escarp, which is the witch world, where there's sorcery there, there's magic there, but only the women can wield magic, none of the men. And Simon is just dumped into this world, right in the middle of everything that's going on. And he ends up helping a woman who's fleeing some people, and he helps her escape and follows her, and she turns out to be a witch. And it's everything that goes from there. Now, this is one of my all-time favorite series. Simon Tregarth, one of my all-time favorite characters. And I like to write, and I actually have a character who's named Simon as kind of a hat tip in honor of Simon Tregarth from these stories. And interestingly enough, there's a character in here, I think his name's Chorus, which is, I think, is another character name I use in one of my stories somewhere. A lot of influence from Andre Norton in my writing. And Chorus is kind of not exactly like Tyrion, but Chorus is kind of a dwarf, where he's got a very misshapen body, where the upper part of his body is normal and the bottom part of his body is almost like a child's. So years and years, decades before Tyrion Lannister came along, you had Chorus in this book, which is what struck me about Tyrion Lannister when I started reading A Song of Ice and Fire. I was like, oh, wow, because it's like, for me, Chorus back in the day was my guy like that I liked in the books. But anyway, Simon Tregarth is the first one I think of. Okay, now number 4. What classic novel do you feel in tune with or identify with the main character the most? And I'm actually going with another Andre Norton book. The character Caravan from the Crystal Griffin. There's actually, I think, 3 Griffin books. They're part of the Witch World series. They are the sort of high Halleck part. And Caravan here appears first in the Crystal Griffin. This is an interesting book. And another interesting tidbit or similarity to Game of Thrones, The Song of Ice and Fire, is each chapter is named after the character of the viewpoint of the chapter. So it rotates between Joyce and Caravan. And what's different about this, though, is this book is written in first person. So you get first person Joycean and you get first person Caravan. And that's pretty rare to see multiple first person points of view in a book. Now, Caravan may seem like an odd kind of person for me to identify with, particularly since he's part human and part old one. So he has these amber eyes and he actually has like cloven hoofed feet. So he's very much an outcast, even though he comes from a prestigious family. But just him being an outsider and all that stuff, me growing up, I was, as introverted as you can get. And we moved a lot. My father worked for the bus company. So when he would switch garages of what bus line he was driving, we would sometimes move to be closer to that garage, somewhere all around, in and around the city. So we moved quite a bit. And a lot of the neighborhoods that I moved into, we were kind of the outsiders in each neighborhood for a completely different reason each time. So I identified with Caravan because I was a New Yorker who felt like an outsider in some of the neighborhoods in New York that I lived in. And Caravan is from High Hallock. He's born there. He's from an old family. But because of his mixed blood, I guess, and with the old ones where he's only partly human, he feels like kind of an outsider as well. So that was, as a kid, when I first read this, I'm not even sure how old I was, 11 maybe? So that's one of my favorite characters as well. And question number 5. If you could meet anyone from history, who would it be? This is a really, really tough question. And you get these kind of questions a lot, not just in relation to, I guess, like a booktube thing, but just in general. And it's pretty hard to kind of narrow this down. As someone who loves books, my first choice is I'd like to go back and meet J.R.R. Tolkien. But I'd kind of like to meet him at different stages of his life. I'd want to meet young Tolkien before he goes off to World War I. And then young Professor Tolkien after the war, and when he's newly come to Oxford, and I think he helped work on like the Oxford Dictionary back in his the Inkling days, I think, with him and C.S. Lewis, and they kind of had their own like little writers group going on. And then, of course, to meet Tolkien again later on, after he's written The Lord of the Rings and beginning to get that notoriety. I'd need the TARDIS to be able to time hop through Tolkien's kind of timeline. And other than that, I'm about to start reading David McCullough's John Adams biography. And John Adams has always been the founding father, if you will, who's fascinated me the most. So he'd probably be another one, because that would be an interesting time to go back and be sitting in that room in Independence Hall when they're debating back and forth and creating the nation itself. Be pretty cool to see. And there's so many other things throughout history as well. But those might be my first 2 stops. Okay, now, question number 6. The apocalypse strikes, and you can only take one of your books into the wasteland with you. And what book would you take? Now, Todd the Librarian had probably the smartest answer, because he was taking like a army survival guide, so you wouldn't die out in the wilderness or in the wasteland. But just as a reader, pretending that I magically have all those survival skills, or someone's there with me who's got all the survival skills, and I can just bring a book, then I'm going with my Desert Island book anyway. Tolkien's The Silmarillion. If I have to pick one book that is my favorite book of all time, this is probably it right here. And yeah, I'm due for a complete reread of this. Actually, I started 2017 off with a full reread of The Lord of the Rings. I used to reread it every year. It had been about 10 years since I had done a full read. So I kicked 2017 off in January doing that. And I may have to kick 2018 off doing a full Silmarillion reread. Maybe. I think I will. I'm due for this too. It's been at least 10 years since I've done a full end-to-end, cover-to-cover reread of it. And it is hands down. If you were to read the things that I've written, Tolkien and Andre Norton are probably the 2 biggest influences on me in terms of writer and storyteller. And I don't write like either one of them, but just from my mind and how my mind functions with story and characters and things, there's big, heavy influences from both of these writers. All right. And now it's on to number 7. And if you could write a masterpiece, what would your subject matter or genre of choice be? And for me, it would be epic fantasy. Now, I mentioned earlier, I do like to write. I actually have been writing just for fun for many, many, many years. When I was, I think, just starting junior high school, which apparently is now called middle school these days for some strange reason, I decided I was going to write the sequel to Lord of the Rings because there wasn't a lot of big fantasy published at that point. I'd read what was out already by then. And so I spent probably about a month in my lunch hour creating the beginning of what would be the sequel to Lord of the Rings. Realized after about a month, I'd rather just create my own universe, create my own world, create my own stories, since I already had kind of all those characters that I'd been creating in my head anyway, playing with G.I. Joes and different things like that. So I just started writing my own stuff. And I actually have my writings span a 10,000-year history of these 5 royal families. So most of my writing is found somewhere in this 10,000-year timeline, from like creation myth stuff to early fantasy, medieval fantasy, high fantasy, and then technology kind of comes into play. And then you still have magic and all those things from the medieval fantasy times, but you have technology to go along with it. So you have faster than light travel with wizards, basically, some form of that. So yeah, so if I was to ever write a masterpiece, it would be some story along that 10,000-year timeline, from fantasy to science fantasy, I guess, since it'll be a melding of the two. Now, question number 8 is, if you were a drink, what would you be? Now, that's a tough one too, because tea is probably, obviously, outside of water, tea is probably my favorite go-to drink. I actually have some iced tea, unsweetened tea here. But after that, I'm also quite a big craft beer guy. So for this one, I'm going to go with a beer. And since I'm Irish on my mother's side, I'm going to go with an Irish red ale. And I love Irish red ales anyway. I love big hoppy beers, like the big American hoppy beers with the big, all the grapefruit and tropical notes and the bitterness. But give me a great kind of like English or Irish like red ale that has some bitterness, but it's got that strong, solid malt backbone. And since when I was younger, this was pretty blonde and this was pretty red. So I'll go with the Irish red ale. Okay, 2 more questions. Question number 9. What is your favorite foreign language book? And for that, I am going with, I'm going with The Master and Margarita. And this is by Mikhail Bulgakov. And this is translated by Mira Ginsberg. If you have not read this, I highly, highly recommend it. This is just a absolutely fantastic read. Great, great imagination in this book. It is a lot of fun. And apparently this was suppressed in the Soviet Union for 26 years. So for a lot of the people who've been doing those sort of banned books things I've seen recently, this would probably be somewhere on your list. But really just a supremely imaginative story and just a hell of a ride. And I highly, highly recommend it. So this is my number 1 favorite foreign language book. And now the last question. And that's the, and that's the what separates us from other life forms on Earth? And this is another one of those questions that, I could spend 5 seconds or probably 5 hours talking about this. And I'm just going to go with a couple of simple answers. I guess the obvious basic one is humans possess the ability to reason, which supposedly is unique to our species. And I'm going to go with that combination of reason and the divine, the concept of the deity. And those are pretty interesting concepts that don't often commingle sometimes. But I'm going to pretty much go with those 2 things. the ability to reason and science and unravel the just mathematical mysteries of the universe, but also reach for that concept of the divine out there as well. And the ability to kind of go in those two seemingly completely different directions. And so I'm just going to leave that there before I just launch down a deep road of rambling and going on about all sorts of stuff. So that was it. I really like this. This is a pretty cool book tag. As far as who I'm going to tag, I don't really know. Since there's a question about drinks in it, I'm just going to say I tag MorgyyReads. Since Morggy, if you don't watch MorgyyReads' channel, I highly suggest it. She's a lot of fun, lots of really cool videos, and she does every once in a while a drunk review to things. So that's why I guess because of that question, I'm going to tag Morggy. And that's about it. Again, go check out Todd the Librarian's channel, and James, is it Chatham or Chatham? I'm sorry, James, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, but I'm going to link to both of them down below. Since I've tagged MorgyyReads, I'll link to her down below as well. And that's pretty much a wrap for me. I will be up on YouTube again on my BookTube channel, probably on Friday with a Friday Reads. And coming in the next couple of days, before the weekend, hopefully. If not, then definitely on the weekend will be my October wrap-up and my November TBR. And I guess that's pretty much it. I am Charles of Sir Book Sage, and happy reading.